The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for nearly a kilometer. Its walls were made of living crystal that shifted colors with the moods of those inside. Right now, the crystals glowed a deep purple, the color of Vethkai pride. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the back entrance, as she always did. Humans were not allowed to use the main doors. That privilege belonged to the elder races, the species who had ruled the stars for thousands of years before humanity had even discovered fire. She took her seat at the very back of the chamber, in the section reserved for what the Concord called developing species. The chair was too large for her human frame. It had been designed for the Vethkai, who stood 3 meters tall and had scales like polished obsidian. Everything in the Concord was designed for the Vethkai. Elena had served as Earth's ambassador for 15 years. She had learned to keep her face calm, her voice soft, and her anger buried deep where no one could see it. Today would test all of those skills. The High Speaker entered the chamber, and every being rose to their feet. Triumvir Keth Oren was ancient even by Vethkai standards. He had ruled the hegemony for 600 years, and he would likely rule for 600 more. His scales had faded to gray with age, but his eyes still burned with cold intelligence. He settled onto his throne because that was what it was, no matter what they called it, and waved a clawed hand. The Concord recognizes the petition from the Terran delegation. Elena stood and walked to the speaking platform. She could feel the eyes of 100 species upon her. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with pity, and many with barely hidden contempt. Humans were the youngest species in the Concord. They had only been members for 3 centuries, to races that measured their histories in tens of thousands of years. Humans were children playing at civilization. Honored members of the Concord, Elena began, her voice steady. Earth respectfully requests expanded trade rights in the Outer Rim territories. Our colonies there have grown significantly, and current restrictions prevent us from. The Outer Rim territories fall under Vethkai protection. Kethoran interrupted. He did not even look at her. Your colonies exist there by our generosity. You should be grateful for what you have. Elena kept her expression neutral. We are grateful, High Speaker. We simply ask for the opportunity to trade more freely with our neighbors. Many species in the Rim have expressed interest in human goods and services. A rumble of laughter went through the Vethkai section of the chamber. Kethoran's lips pulled back from his teeth in what might have been a smile. Human goods? Tell me, Ambassador, what do humans make that anyone would want? Your ships are slow, your weapons are weak. Your people die of old age before they can master even basic stellar navigation. More laughter. Elena felt her hands tighten into fists behind her back, where no one could see. We offer medical technology, she said quietly. Agricultural solutions. Educational programs. Humans have much to share with. Enough. Kethoran waved his hand again, dismissing her words like smoke. The petition is denied. The mammals speak of ambition. He looked around the chamber, inviting his audience to share in the joke. How endearing. Elena stood there for a long moment. The crystals in the walls had shifted to a mocking shade of yellow. She bowed her head not in submission, but to hide the fire in her eyes and returned to her seat. The session continued for another 3 hours. Trade agreements were signed between elder races. Territory disputes were settled. A new species was admitted to the Concord as an observer member, which meant they would sit in the back with the humans and wait their turn for respect that would never come. When it was finally over, Elena walked back to her ship alone. The corridors of the Concord station were wide and beautiful, filled with art from 1,000 worlds. She passed a group of young Vethkai who deliberately stepped into her path, forcing her to walk around them. One of them made a comment in their native language that her translator rendered as soft skin. She did not react. She never reacted. That was the job. Her ship was small and old, a diplomatic vessel that the Concord barely considered spaceworthy. It had been searched 3 times in the past month by Vethkai security forces looking for contraband. They never found anything. Of course, there was nothing to find. Elena sealed the airlock behind her and finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking. After 15 years, they still shook after every session. She walked to the communication center and activated a secure channel. The encryption was standard Terran military, which the Vethkai considered laughably primitive. They had no idea that the primitive encryption contained layers they could not even detect. Ambassador Vasquez reporting, she said. Petition denied. High Speaker Kethoran made his position clear. Humanity remains beneath their notice. She paused, then added the phrase she had been authorized to include if the situation warranted it. They still see what we want them to see. The message would take 3 days to reach Earth through normal channels, but it would not travel through normal channels. It would bounce through a network of hidden relay stations, buried in asteroids and moons across the galaxy, until it reached the offices of people whose names did not appear on any official record. Elena sat down in her pilot's chair and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the deep black between solar systems, something was waiting. Something that the Vethkai, with all their ancient wisdom and advanced technology, had never detected. She thought about her grandfather, who had worked in a shipyard on Mars. He had spent 40 years building things he would never see completed. He died believing that his grandchildren would live in a galaxy that respected them. She thought about her mother, who had served in the Terran Defense Fleet, the small, visible fleet that the Concord allowed humanity to maintain. Her mother had trained for battles she knew she could never win, against enemies who outnumbered her 1,000 to 1. She thought about the children growing up on Earth right now, who learned in school about the partnership between humanity and the Concord. They were taught to be grateful. They were taught to be patient. They were taught that someday, if humans worked hard enough and proved themselves worthy, they might earn the respect of the elder races. They were not taught about the Terran continuity mandate. They were not taught about the shipyards in Fold Space, building day and night for 200 years. They were not taught about the 500,000 dreadnoughts waiting in the darkness. Elena allowed herself a small smile. The Vethkai thought humans were weak because they died young. They never considered what a species might accomplish when every generation knew it had limited time. They never understood that humans did not build for themselves, they built for their children, and their children's children, and all the generations that would come after. The Vethkai built monuments to their own glory. Humans built legacies. Somewhere in the Oort cloud at the edge of the Sol system, automated factories that had worked without pause for 2 centuries continued their labor. They did not know about politics or pride or the petty cruelties of ancient empires. They only knew their purpose, to build, and build, and build, until the day when their creations would finally be needed. That day was coming. Elena set course for Earth. Behind her, the Concord station glittered like a jewel against the darkness of space, beautiful, ancient, and completely unaware of what was waiting in the shadows. The meek would inherit nothing. But humanity had never been meek. They had only been patient, and their patience was almost at an end. The attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning. New Geneva was a quiet world on the edge of human space. It had green forests, blue oceans, and cities that rose like silver towers against the sky. 4 million people lived there. They were farmers and teachers and engineers. They had children who went to school and old people who sat in parks and watched the sunset. They had 12 hours to live. The Dreth warships appeared in orbit just after dawn. The Dreth were a client species of the Vethkai, not strong enough to rule themselves, but eager to prove their worth to their masters. They had been given permission to pacify the human colony. The official reason was that New Geneva was harboring terrorists. The real reason was that humanity needed to be reminded of its place. Admiral Marcus Chen received the distress call on his flagship, the Terran vessel, Vigilant. He was 3 days away at maximum speed. He ordered his fleet to move immediately, knowing they would arrive too late. The Dreth did not bother with precision strikes. They did not target military installations or government buildings. They simply opened fire on everything. Orbital bombardment turned forests into ash and cities into craters. Ships full of refugees trying to escape were shot down before they could reach orbit. By the time the killing stopped, 3 million people were dead. The survivors, barely 1 million, huddled in underground shelters, listening to the silence above them. Chen arrived with his fleet of 200 ships. It was everything humanity was officially allowed to have. The Dreth fleet numbered over 1,000. They did not even bother to form a battle line. They simply waited, weapons charged, daring the humans to do something. "Admiral," his tactical officer said quietly, "they're hailing us." The Dreth commander appeared on screen. He was a squat, brutal-looking creature with 4 arms and eyes like black stones. "Ah, the human fleet," he said. "Have you come to avenge your dead? Please try. It would give my crews some entertainment." Chen's hands gripped the arms of his command chair. Every instinct screamed at him to attack, to make them pay, to do something. But he knew the math. 200 against 1,000. His ships were older, slower, weaker. The battle would last maybe an hour. Then there would be no human fleet at all. "We have come to evacuate survivors," Chen said. His voice was flat and dead. "Will you allow this?" The Dreth commander laughed. "Take them. Take your weak, frightened people. Run back to your little worlds and remember this day. Remember what happens when humans forget their place." The evacuation took 3 days. Chen stayed on the bridge the entire time, watching the Dreth ships patrol overhead. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He just watched and remembered. When the last transport was away, he finally allowed himself to speak. "Get me a secure channel to Earth." The message he sent was brief. "New Geneva has fallen. 3 million dead. Dreth forces withdrew without pursuit. The fleet is intact but irrelevant. Awaiting orders." The response came 6 hours later. It was not from the Terran Defense Ministry. It was from the Unified Council itself. "Admiral Chen, return to Earth immediately. All fleet commanders to the capital. Priority Omega. Priority Omega." In his 30 years of service, Chen had never heard that phrase used outside of training exercises. It meant that the Council was about to make a decision that would change everything. He looked out at the stars, at the burned world below, at the distant lights of the Dreth ships still celebrating their victory. Then he gave the order to return home. On Earth, the Council chamber was sealed. Armed guards stood at every entrance. The 47 members who governed all of human space sat in silence as President Amara Okonkwo entered the room. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes. She had been a doctor before entering politics, and she still moved with the careful patience of someone used to dealing with life and death. She took her seat and looked around the table. "You have all seen the reports from New Geneva," she said. "You know what the Dreth have done. You know that the Concord will do nothing. The question before us is simple. What do we do now?" The debate lasted for hours. Some argued for diplomacy. Others demanded immediate retaliation. A few suggested that humanity should simply accept its fate, that fighting would only make things worse. Finally, an old man at the end of the table raised his hand. Dr. Samuel Torres was 94 years old. He was a historian who had spent his entire life studying one subject: how other species had consistently underestimated humanity. "May I speak?" he asked. Okonkwo nodded. Torres stood slowly. His body was frail, but his voice was steady. "I have studied every war humanity has ever fought," he said. "I have studied every empire that has risen and fallen across the galaxy. And I have noticed a pattern. The strong grow comfortable. They forget that strength is not permanent. They look at the weak and see nothing to fear." He paused. "The Vethkai have ruled for 12,000 years. They have forgotten what it means to struggle. They have forgotten what it means to be hungry, to be desperate, to build with your bare hands because no one will help you." He looked around the room. "They think we are fragile because we die young. They do not understand that death makes us urgent. They think we are weak because we feel deeply. They do not understand that emotion gives us fire." His voice grew stronger. "For 200 years, we have built in secret. Every generation has added to the work of the one before. We have created something that the galaxy has never seen. The question is not whether we can fight. The question is whether this is the moment we choose to stop hiding." President Okonkwo listened carefully. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "If we activate the mandate, there is no going back. The galaxy will never see us the same way again. Are we prepared for what comes after?" Torres smiled. It was a sad smile, full of memory and hope. "Madam President, we have been preparing for 200 years. Our ancestors built for this moment. Our children will inherit what we do today. I say we honor the dead of New Geneva. I say we show the galaxy who we really are." The vote was unanimous. Within the hour, encrypted signals began pulsing outward from Earth. They traveled through hidden relays, through fold space channels that no one else knew existed, to destinations scattered across the galaxy. In shipyards that had worked in darkness for generations, crews received their orders. On vessels that had waited in the void for decades, soldiers woke from long sleep and began preparations. In command centers buried beneath dead moons, admirals studied battle plans that had been refined over centuries. The message was simple: mandate active. All units to condition Prometheus. 500,000 ships began to move, and the galaxy, comfortable in its certainty that humans were weak and harmless, had no idea what was coming. Triumvir Kethoran was celebrating. The great hall of his palace was filled with 1,000 guests, the most powerful beings in the Vethkai hegemony. They feasted on delicacies from 100 worlds. They drank wines that had aged for centuries. They congratulated each other on the successful discipline of the human colony. The mammals needed a reminder, Kethoran announced to applause. Now they will be quiet for another generation. Perhaps two. His guests laughed and raised their glasses. The humans were a joke, a minor nuisance on the edge of civilized space. They had been put in their place. All was well. Then the alarms began to sound. Kethoran's personal guard rushed into the hall. Their faces showed something he had not seen in centuries. Fear. High speaker. Our sensors are detecting gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Kethoran frowned. Anomalies? What kind of anomalies? Something is emerging from fold space. Many things. We cannot determine the exact number. The celebration died. Guests looked at each other with confusion. Fold space emergence was normal. Ships arrived and departed every day. But the guard's fear suggested something far beyond normal. Kethoran strode to the observation window. The night sky above Keth Prime was beautiful, filled with the lights of 3 moons and countless stars. But now there was something else. New lights were appearing, one after another, scattered across the darkness like diamonds being thrown onto black velvet. Get me a visual on those contacts, he ordered. The holographic display activated, showing a view from orbital sensors. What Kethoran saw made him stop breathing. A ship was emerging from fold space. It was enormous, 5 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with weapons that Vethkai computers could not identify. Its hull was dark gray, marked with symbols in a language that he recognized but had never taken seriously. Terran. Human. Before he could speak, another ship appeared beside it. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 100. They kept coming. Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the Terran Dreadnought Unconquered and watched the deployment unfold. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. There were no cheers, no celebrations. This was not a moment for joy. This was a moment for justice. Admiral, Captain Yuki Tanaka reported from her station. Emergence is proceeding on schedule. 400,000 vessels now in position across conquered space. 52,000 emerging in the Keth system. All weapons charged. All crews reporting ready. Chen nodded slowly. He had dreamed of this moment for 30 years. Ever since he first learned the truth about the continuity mandate. But dreams and reality were different things. The weight of command pressed down on him like gravity. The Vethkai fleet? 3,000 vessels moving to intercept. They appear. Confused. Chen almost smiled. Confused was an understatement. The entire Vethkai High Fleet, the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, was facing a human armada that outnumbered them 17-1. Every tactical doctrine they had ever learned was now useless. Open a channel. All frequencies. Channel open, Admiral. Chen stepped forward to the main view screen. He could see Keth Prime below, a beautiful world of purple oceans and golden continents. He could see the Vethkai fleet scrambling to form a defensive line, and he could see his own ships, thousands of them, blocking out the stars with their mass. Vethkai High Command, he said, his voice calm and clear. This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Continuity Fleet. We are not here to start a war. We are here to end one. On Keth Prime, Kethoran watched the human admiral speak. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were showing him. This was impossible. Humans could barely build functional starships. They were a primitive species, tolerated only because they posed no threat. And yet those ships were real. Those weapons were real. That fleet, vast beyond comprehension, was very, very real. Respond, he ordered. Tell them. He stopped. What could he possibly tell them? What threat could he make? His entire fleet was surrounded. His entire civilization was suddenly at the mercy of creatures he had mocked for centuries. This is not possible, he finally transmitted. You are humans. You are nothing. Admiral Chen's response was broadcast across every frequency, to every ship in the system, to every world in the hegemony. We were never nothing. We were patient. The silence that followed was absolute. On 1,000 vessels, Vethkai commanders stared at their sensors in disbelief. On Keth Prime, civilians looked up at a sky filled with human ships. In the Great Hall, Party guests who had been laughing about human weakness minutes ago now stood frozen with terror. Captain Tanaka approached Chen quietly. "Admiral, they're trying to charge their weapons. Should we?" "No." Chen's voice was firm. "Hold position. All ships hold position." "Sir, they're scared," Chen explained. "They're trying to provoke us into firing first. Then they can tell the galaxy that the humans attacked without cause." He shook his head. "We're not going to give them that excuse. We're going to stand here, with our weapons ready and our fingers off the trigger, and we're going to let them understand exactly what they're facing." The standoff lasted for 6 hours. During that time, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Every major Concord system now had a Terran battle group in orbit. The Dreth homeworld was surrounded by 8,000 dreadnoughts. The economic hubs, the military strongholds, the ancient capitals of species that had ruled for millennia. All of them were now under the shadow of human ships, and not a single shot had been fired. Finally, Kethoran sent a new transmission. His voice had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something Chen had never expected to hear from a Vethkai: uncertainty. "What do you want?" Chen looked at his crew. These men and women had trained their entire lives for a battle that might never happen. Their parents and grandparents had built ships they would never see fly. Generations of humanity had worked and sacrificed and hoped, all for this moment. "I want you to understand something," Chen replied. "For 300 years, you looked at us and saw weakness. You saw our short lives, our small bodies, our emotions. You never asked what we were doing with those short lives. You never wondered what we might be building while you were busy feeling superior." He paused. "We built this fleet in secret, one ship at a time, for 200 years. Every human who ever lived under your contempt contributed to it. The workers who forged the hull plates never saw them installed. The engineers who designed the weapons never saw them fire. They did it anyway, because they knew that someday, their children, or their grandchildren, would need them." He let that sink in. That is who humans are. We do not build for ourselves. We build for those who come after. And now, Triumvir, you are going to answer for New Geneva. 3 million people are dead because you wanted to teach us our place. You are going to learn that our place is wherever we choose to stand. Below, on Keth Prime, the celebrations were over. The crystal walls of the Great Hall had turned a deep, fearful gray, and in the sky above, 500,000 human ships waited in silence, patient as they had always been, ready for whatever came next. The galaxy had never known silence like this. For 3 days, no one moved. Human ships held their positions around every major world. Concord fleets stayed frozen where they had stopped, afraid to fire, afraid to run, afraid to do anything that might trigger the storm. The numbers spread across 1 million worlds, repeated in 100 languages. 500,000 Terran Dreadnoughts, each one 5 kilometers long, each one carrying enough weapons to destroy a planet. The combined firepower of the human fleet exceeded everything the Concord could bring against it combined. And still, humanity did not attack. Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to the Concord chamber for the first time since the revelation. But this time, she did not enter through the back door. She walked through the main entrance, past the guards who stepped aside without a word, past the delegates who watched her with a mixture of fear and wonder. She took her seat not at the back, but at the front. No one objected. The chamber was full, but quieter than she had ever heard it. The crystals in the walls glowed a pale, uncertain white. Species that had ignored humanity for centuries now stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Triumvir Kethoran was present, but he did not sit on his throne. He stood to the side, surrounded by nervous advisors, looking older than Elena remembered. The arrogance that had defined him for 600 years had cracked. "The Concord recognizes the Terran delegation," the speaker announced. His voice was careful and respectful. Elena stood. She did not need to speak loudly. Everyone was listening. "For 3 centuries, she began, humanity has been part of this Concord. We came to you with open hands and hopeful hearts. We wanted to learn from you. We wanted to grow alongside you. We wanted to be partners in building a better galaxy." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Instead, you treated us like animals. You mocked our short lives. You laughed at our emotions. You forced us to use back doors and sit in back rows. You searched our ships and restricted our trade. And when we dared to ask for basic dignity, You burned our colony and killed 3 million of our people. The silence in the chamber was absolute. You thought we were weak because we die young. You never understood what that means. A species that knows death is coming does not waste time. We work harder. We build faster. We dream bigger. Every human who ever lived knew they would not see the end of their story, so they made sure their children could continue it. She gestured to the view screen, which showed the fleet still holding position above Keth Prime. Every one of those ships was built by people who died before seeing it completed. Every hull plate was forged by workers who knew they would never fly among the stars. Every weapon system was designed by engineers who understood they would never see it fire. Her voice grew stronger. They built anyway. Not for glory, not for power, not for themselves. They built for us. For this moment. For the chance to stand in front of you and say, "We are not your pets. We are not your curiosities. We are humanity. And we have been watching you far longer than you have been watching us." The Dreth ambassador rose from his seat. His four hands were shaking, but he tried to maintain his authority. "What do you want?" he demanded. "War, revenge. You have the power to destroy us all. So do it. Show the galaxy that humans are just as brutal as everyone else." Elena looked at him calmly. "No." The single word hung in the air. "No," she repeated. "We did not build this fleet to become conquerors. We built it so we would never have to be victims again. There is a difference." She turned to address the full chamber. "Here is what humanity wants. First, justice for New Geneva. Those responsible for ordering and carrying out the attack will face trial. Second, full recognition as equal members of this Concord. No more backdoors. No more restrictions. No more treating us as lesser beings. Third, reform of the Concord itself. No species should have the power to destroy another without consequence. What happened to us could happen to any of you. Next time, there might not be a secret fleet waiting to restore balance." Kethoran stepped forward. His voice was quiet, almost broken. "And if we refuse?" Elena met his eyes. "Then our fleet will remain in position. We will not fire first. We never fire first. But we will not leave. And every day that passes, every species in this galaxy will see that the mighty Vethkai hegemony is trapped by a race they called weak. Your power is built on the belief that you are strong. How long will that belief last when humanity holds your homeworld hostage without lifting a finger?" The logic was simple and brutal. The Vethkai could fight and lose, or they could negotiate and survive. There was no third option. President Amara Okonkwo's voice came over the communication system, broadcast from Earth. "We do not seek empire," she said. "We have seen what empires do. They grow proud, they grow cruel, and eventually they fall. Humanity wants something different. We want a galaxy where strength comes with responsibility, where no species is dismissed because of how they look or how long they live, where children do not grow up afraid of the sky." She paused. "We built these ships because we had to, because no one would protect us if we did not protect ourselves. But protection is not the same as domination. We are offering you a choice. You can be our enemies, and we will defend ourselves. Or you can be our partners, and together we can build something better than the Concord has ever been." Across the galaxy, species who had also suffered under Vethkai dominance listened to these words. Small races who had been bullied and ignored. Young civilizations who had been told they would never matter. Entire worlds that had given up hope of ever being treated as equals. They looked at the human ships filling the sky, and they saw something they had never expected to see. A future. The Dreth sovereignty surrendered 3 hours later. Their military commanders were handed over to face justice for New Geneva. Their government agreed to pay reparations to the survivors. The Vethkai hegemony requested diplomatic consultations, a face-saving phrase that meant they were ready to negotiate. Within a week, the framework of a new Concord began to take shape. It would take years to fully implement, but the foundation was laid. Equal representation for all species, protection for developing civilizations, accountability for those in power, and at the center of it all, 500,000 human ships waited patiently. A reminder of what happens when the strong forget that the weak are watching. Elena Vasquez stood at the observation window of the Concord station and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, her grandfather's work was finally complete. Somewhere out there, her mother's training had finally paid off. Somewhere out there, 3 million ghosts were finally at rest. She closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time in 15 years, to feel hope. 1 year had passed since the stars filled with Terran Dreadnoughts. The galaxy was still learning to adjust. Admiral Marcus Chen stood on a platform overlooking the Memorial Garden on New Geneva. The world had been reborn in the months since the revelation. New cities rose where craters had been. New forests grew where ash had covered the ground. Children played in parks that had once been graveyards. 4 million people lived here now. Some were survivors who had returned. Others were new settlers who had come to help rebuild. All of them carried the memory of what had happened and what had come after. Today was Chen's retirement ceremony. After 40 years of service, he was finally laying down his command. The fleet would continue without him. It would always continue. President Okonkwo stood beside him, along with Ambassador Vasquez and dozens of other leaders who had guided humanity through its greatest challenge. But the crowd that filled the garden was not made up of politicians and admirals. It was made up of ordinary people, teachers and farmers, engineers and artists, children and grandparents. The people who had built the fleet without ever seeing it. The people for whom the fleet had been built. Chen stepped forward to speak. His uniform was crisp, his metals polished, but his eyes were soft with emotion. When I was a young officer, he began, I learned a secret that changed my life. I learned that for 200 years, humanity had been building a hidden fleet. I learned that my grandfather had helped design the fusion cores that powered our dreadnoughts. I learned that my mother had helped train the pilots who would never fly in her lifetime. He paused, looking out at the crowd. I asked my commanding officer why we built in secret, why we hid our strength instead of showing it, and she told me something I have never forgotten. She said, power that is seen is power that is feared. Power that is hidden is power that is trusted. He let those words sink in. For 3 centuries, we let the galaxy underestimate us. We accepted their mockery and their contempt. We did this not because we were weak, but because we were wise. We knew that if we showed our strength too soon, they would unite against us. We knew that if we proved ourselves a threat, they would destroy us before we could defend ourselves. He gestured to the sky, where a single dreadnought passed silently overhead. Every one of those ships carries the names of the people who built her. Every hull plate remembers the hands that forged it. Every weapon system honors the minds that designed it. We did not build a war machine. We built a monument to human patience, human sacrifice, and human love. His voice grew quieter. I am often asked what we would have done if the Vethkai had not attacked New Geneva. Would we have kept hiding forever? Would the fleet have remained in darkness for another 100 years? Another 1,000? He shook his head. I do not know. And I am grateful that we never had to find out. The attack on New Geneva was a tragedy beyond words, but it was also a moment of truth. It forced us to choose between remaining hidden and standing tall. We chose to stand. He straightened his shoulders. I am proud of what we did, not because we built the greatest fleet in galactic history, not because we brought the Vethkai to their knees without firing a shot. I am proud because, when we had the power to destroy, we chose to protect. When we could have conquered, we chose to build. When we could have taken revenge, we chose justice. He turned to look at President Okonkwo. That is the legacy I leave to those who come after. Not ships or weapons or military strategy, but the knowledge that strength means nothing without wisdom, and power means nothing without mercy. The applause that followed was not loud or dramatic. It was something quieter and deeper, the sound of people honoring a man who had carried an impossible burden and set it down with grace. Later that evening, in a quiet corner of the garden, Dr. Samuel Torres sat on a bench and watched the sunset. He was 95 now, and his body was fading, but his mind was still sharp, still curious, still wondering about the future. A child approached him, a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She had dark hair and bright eyes and the fearless confidence of someone who had never known a galaxy that did not respect her people. Excuse me, she said politely. Are you the historian? The one who voted for the mandate? Torres smiled. I am. What's your name? Sarah. I'm doing a project for school about the revelation. My teacher said I should ask you questions. Torres patted the bench beside him. Sit down, Sarah. Ask whatever you like. The girl climbed up beside him, her legs dangling off the edge. She pulled out a small tablet and looked at her list of questions. Why did humans build so many ships if they didn't want to conquer anyone? Torres considered the question carefully. It was a good question, the kind that adults sometimes forgot to ask. Do you know what a promise is, Sarah? She nodded. It's when you say you'll do something and then you do it. That's right. Well, 200 years ago, humanity made a promise to itself. We promised that our children would never have to be afraid. We promised that no matter how long it took, we would build something strong enough to keep them safe. He pointed at the dreadnought still visible in the evening sky. Those ships are the promise we kept. Every generation added to them. Every human who ever lived under the old Concord contributed something, their work, their knowledge, their hope, and when the time came, when our people were attacked and no one would help us, we were ready. Sarah thought about this. But you still didn't fight. You just stood there. Torres nodded. That was the hardest part. Anyone can build weapons. Anyone can start a war. But it takes wisdom to hold back, to wait, to show your enemy that you could destroy them but choose not to. That is real strength, Sarah. Not the power to kill, but the power to spare. The girl wrote something on her tablet. Then she looked up with another question. Do you think it will happen again? Will someone attack us? Torres looked at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the fleet was still deployed, watching, waiting, patient as always. Maybe, he said honestly. The galaxy is a big place, and there are many species who do not know us yet. But I think they will learn. They will see what we did here, and they will understand that humanity is not to be underestimated. He put a gentle hand on her shoulder. And if they forget, we will remind them. That is what the fleet is for. Not to threaten, but to remember. To carry the promise forward, from generation to generation, forever. Sarah smiled and closed her tablet. Thank you, Dr. Torres. You're welcome, Sarah. Now go home. It's getting late, and your parents will worry. The girl hopped off the bench and ran toward the garden's exit, her footsteps light on the new grass. Torres watched her go, thinking about the future she would inherit. Above him, the dreadnought continued its slow patrol across the sky. Its hull gleamed silver in the last light of day, carrying the names of those who had built her and the hopes of those who never would. Somewhere in the galaxy, a young Vethkai historian was writing a new chapter of history. Somewhere, species who had been dismissed for centuries were standing taller. Somewhere, children were being born who would never know a time when humanity was weak. The long game was over. The future had begun, and in the darkness between stars, the Terran continuity fleet sailed on a promise kept, a legacy fulfilled, and a warning written across the sky in letters of steel and starlight. Humanity had been patient. Now the galaxy would remember, forever.